What's going on, people? The monthly card for December has been revealed for the US, I don't know, we're going to call this regular Legends client. And that card is on the screen now. It's the Ayelid Guardian. It's an 11 cost 8/8 with guard, immune to lethal, and on summon another copy of this card in the other lane. So it's kind of like the Golden Saint effect, but this effect is not conditional. It will always trigger. So without talking about what decks it goes into, I think this is a pretty powerful card. You're getting 16 worth of stats for 11. You're getting guard in each lane, which is very solid, and neither of them can be removed by lethal pings or noodles. So it has to be direct removal or leaf lurker type removal. So that's pretty solid. The closest stat per cost I think I can think of off the top of my head is Siege Crawler, which is 15 for 11. But that's on one body, and it has breakthrough. This is more stats, 2 bodies, and it's guard. So it's like a defensive Siege Crawler, where Siege Crawler is like a very offensive card. So overall, I think it's a pretty solid card. The only, I guess, concern I have when it comes to the card as a whole is what is its home going to be. And the reason I say that is a lot of people look at this and say, great, Telvanni gets another fantastic defensive tool. Telvanni has all the good cards. Screw this game, Telvanni's too good. But I don't think this card gets run in Telvanni as long as Conscription is still a card that exists. Conscription Telvanni anyway, their late game isn't really focused on playing big creatures. Like, Conscription Telvanni doesn't run like super high quality cards like either Vampire, doesn't run Atronach, doesn't run Manamorpho. You don't see these late game cards in Conscription Telvanni because it's not its strategy. Telvanni Conscription's going for burn you out, flood the board, and eventually win that way. So I don't think it actually fits in that deck at all, really, unless you were to build a different version of Telvanni that's not a Conscription deck and is more of like a traditional control ramp Telvanni, in which case then, yeah, I definitely think you can fit this card into that list. It's iffy though. I find it pretty interesting. Other decks, you're looking at things like Empire. That's another one that's typically a Conscription list, so you're not going to really be able to fit this in a traditional Conscription list. Although, the interesting thing about this card is, if you shuffle in, let's say you play the Ayelid Guardian, and you play a New Era to shuffle both of those cards into your deck, plus more, each one of those will be able to summon. It still has the summon effect, so you'll basically shuffle 2 copies in from the 1 copy you play. That's a very niche use, but I do think it's just a interesting way that this game works, since they are identical copies. But again, Conscription Empire doesn't really have room to run something like this at all. The place where I think that this card can probably work the best is like a regular Ramp Scout, and it kind of came back a bit. There's been 2 versions floating around, and they kind of have a lot in common. But for quite a while, we had Curse Scout running things like... where's that card? The Zivkin Banelord, wherever that guy is. Oh, he's purple. It's been running things like Zivkin Banelord and SharePoint Dragon and the Drain Vitality Shout. And all of those things combined would be able to kind of clear the board pretty well. And that deck had a fair amount of ramp. If you're playing Scout, basically you're always going to be running Thorn Histmage, so you already have an okay amount of ramp in your deck. And then if you include like literally anything else, and we've got quite a bit of options, you know, Supply Runner, Tree Minder, Spine of Elder's Blood. You've got a lot of different ramp options at this point, but even just Thorn Histmage alone is close to enough of a ramp package to almost be a ramp deck when you're running a 50-card deck. But even just tossing in a Tree Minder or Supply Runner will do plenty for you as well. But that deck can definitely use a couple top-end threats. The deck is mostly focused around, you know, curse effects and controlling the board that way, but giving them another way, or just another thing to spread the board, and playing 2 8/8s that are immune to lethal would be a good way of protecting your SharePoint dragons or your other goblins and stuff like that that are giving you curse effects. So I think it could potentially fit in that. And another version of Scout that's popped up since we got the Tamriel collection has been like an old school kind of Shout Scout, and I think that's been because of Call Dragon. This card is obviously very good, and this upgrades all your shouts. So you have Call Dragon, you have Soul Tear, you've got Drain Vitality, and you're kind of using those to ramp into your big dragons. Like, you're basically trying to play Odiving and Parthenax, but also getting some pretty insane shout value along the way. And in a deck like that, where you're ramping and getting shout value and getting into playing big bodies, I do think that there is the opportunity to fit in an 11-cost big guard, because it does almost come very close to shutting down both lanes. And that's the kind of thing that you need to kind of play Parthenax happily. Because if Parthenax isn't coming down on an empty board, and let's say you're at risk of either losing or losing in a turn or two, and it's turn 11, you want to play Parthenax next turn, but the board's not clear and you're in danger, your opponent has a board, Ayelid Guardian is the perfect thing to kind of drop down, block both lanes, hopefully soak a ton of damage from your opponent to the point where Parthenax can just come down happily on turn 12. Because the thing you never want to have to do is play Parthenax and hope for a specific shout, just because it's RNG. So you don't want to roll Parthenax and be in a position where you have to hit, like, for example, 2 out of 3 Drained Vitalities in order to not die. You don't want to be in that scenario. So if you can drop an Ayelid Guardian on 11, or obviously earlier if you had ramped at all, and to kind of soak all of that damage, and at this point you could soak at least 16 damage off the board with these two things. If you can do that, you are more than likely putting yourself in a position where you can drop Parthenax on 12 safely. So I think that could fit in kind of some of these slower scout decks that have been... Well, Curse Scout's been popular for quite a little bit now. But this version of Shout Scout's been back since Call Dragon has come around. So I would say on that front... this does push that deck a little bit more, and maybe this card can be enough to experiment with non-conscription versions of Telvanni or Empire. I don't know how well that's going to pull off. Those decks obviously have a bunch of interesting tools, but I still think the conscription versions of them are going to be probably better. As far as something like... Ebonheart, it's tricky. Like old Ebonheart, that was like the Slay, Rage, Ramp Ebonheart. I think Ayelid Guardian probably could fit into that deck quite nicely. I just don't think there's been a very good Ebonheart deck in a little bit of time now. And the other support that it received from the Tamriel collection was kind of veteran-based. And I still don't think veteran's quite good enough to really be a thing. But I do think that this is a solid option to try and ramp into as a ramp Ebonheart. But Ebonheart's weakness was never in the late game. It always had some pretty ridiculous cards. Like, Purple's already got great late game cards, and Green's got some pretty solid late game cards, and Strength has some very solid late game cards as well. So I don't think ramp/Slay Ebonheart ever was lacking in terms of late game. So I don't know if Ayelid Guardian's going to do enough to make that deck any more relevant. But I do think that playing Ayelid Guardian in some of these kind of established tricolor decks could maybe be enough to tempt you to try something besides a conscription strategy. Not that conscription Ebonheart is really a thing by any means, but more so the Empire and or Telvanni route. But if nothing else, I do think that this card will see play in one of the 2 scout decks that have become kind of more popular recently. And even if that is the only place that this card sees play, it will at least have found some sort of home. And I can't speak to the power level of Shout Scout because I haven't played enough ladder to really speak on how powerful that deck is or how much of a boost it needed. But I can say that Curse Scout, I guess that's what people are calling it, but Curse Scout was a strong but not top tier deck. So it getting any boost in power level means it can compete with some decks that were beating it before, at least slightly better. So yeah, that's just my thoughts and some areas where you may want to play Ayelid Guardian. Let me know what you guys think of the card down below in the comment section, and or where you guys are planning on playing it. Yeah, as always, thank you guys all very much for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.